beyond the thunder and lightning, past the clouds, over the dark night. She reached up to the sky of stars and caught the red-hot light of the North Star.
Greetings and welcome back. And as always, thank you all so much for joining me today. Israel seeks a 20-year military deal with the U.S. Under the current 10-year deal, Israel gets at least $3.8 billion of your hard-earned tax dollars per year. And now Israeli officials are looking to increase that number. Folks, is this really just all about the Benjamins? Let's connect some dots and find out.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.
Welcome to the Connecting the Dots podcast with Dr. Wilmer Leon, and I am Wilmer Leon. With each show, my guests and I provide insight and analysis into current events and the broader historical context in which most of these events take place. Let's quickly look at a couple of today's headlines. U.S. inequality is way past revolution time. There's a new report. The rich are richer than the Gilded Age, and half of all U.S. children live in poverty, writes Lee Camp. And you can find this at antiwar.com. He writes, one would think that perhaps the greatest benefit of being a cog in the wheel of bloodthirsty, predatory, wholly unacceptable, rapacious global empire is being rich. Not rich in an Elon Musk monopoly guy kind of way, but rich in a not languishing in poverty kind of way. But this is not true. A large percentage of Americans never get to touch the spoils of U.S. hegemony, the hegemony that is bought and paid for by their very tax dollars. Quote, over 40% of the U.S. population, including 48.9% of children, is considered poor or low income. He continues, you read that right, or the report continues, you read that right. According to a new Oxfam report, half of all American children live in poor or low income homes. Half. When mapped out clearly for all to see, U.S. inequality levels show that the country is way past revolution time. Sorry, let me rephrase that according to Lee Camp. Way past revolution time. Let your brain try to make sense of this and other stats from the Oxfam report. In the last year, the 10 richest U.S. billionaires gained nearly $700 billion. And he says, here's a fun fact. If you make $60,000 a year after taxes, in order to make $700 billion, you would need to work for nearly 12 million years. 12 million years. How can you do that if the largest employer in the country shuts down for weeks at a time? Answer, you can't get there from here. There's another interesting story. And I'm going to do my best to tie all this together, and hopefully at the end of this, it makes sense. Trump's attempt to abridge free speech. Andrew Napolitano, this is from Consortium News. Andrew Napolitano responds to a memo by Donald Trump calling Antifa, which is an ideology, he calls it a domestic terrorism organization, and directs federal law enforcement to disrupt Antifa gatherings. So let's look at the First Amendment. The text of the First Amendment reads as follows. Quote, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise of, that's the establishment and the free exercise clauses, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or of the right of the people to peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances, end quote. First Amendment. It's the First Amendment for a reason, because the framers of the Constitution, the founders of the country, they came to the North American continent, first of all, looking for freedom of religion. They were sick of, I guess it was King Henry, and they were looking for religious freedom. They also realized that if you wanted to have an effective, functioning democracy, however you all want to define it, you had to have the freedom of speech. You had to have the freedom of press. The people needed to be able to read what was going on and to be able to discuss what was going on. And if they didn't like what was going on, they needed to be able to go to the government and let the government know. All right. So what y'all didn't realize, while the country's attention was drawn to the federal government shutdown over the last 42 days, Trump signed National Security Presidential Memorandum 7, NSPM-7, which purports to designate the ideology of Antifa as a domestic terrorist organization, quote unquote, domestic terrorist organization, quote unquote, and directs federal law enforcement to disrupt its gatherings and those of its supporters. He's attacking an ideology as though it's an organization. The gist of NSPM 7 appears to be, and this is Napolitano writing, the president's view that the United States suffers from an enemy from within our borders, an enemy that consists of Americans who hate Christianity, capitalism, and Americanism, and it is somehow the duty of the federal government to disrupt the free speech of those haters because their speech has a tendency to promote violence. I'm not going to get into go down the rabbit hole of the First Amendment and fighting words and all of that, because it is important to realize that not all speech, we do have the right of free speech, but not all speech is free. Oliver Wendell Holmes is the one that told us you can't mistakenly shout fire in a crowded theater. Not all speech is protected. That's where he gets this thing about speech the speech that has a tendency to violence. You can't say things that, you can't say what they call fighting words, things that when they're heard will have the listener or compel the listener to throw a punch. I'll leave it there. So where does a lot of this current ideology from Trump and a lot of this current unconstitutional action from Trump, where does it stem from? There's a guy named Russell Vought. He's the director of the Office of Management and Budget. And Russell Vought was a key figure in writing Project 2025. If you remember, during the election, Project 2025, Donald Trump disavowed all knowledge of Project 2025, even though the guy that wrote the document is now his director of Office of Management and Budget. So Donald Trump was lying about that. Let's move on. Vought, not only was he the author or the co-author, I think because this thing came out of the Enterprise Institute, he was a key figure in designing the government shutdown. I'll say that again. Russell Vought, Trump's director of Office of Management and Budget, was also instrumental in designing the government shutdown. He's one of the key figures in the president's ear, telling the president and telling a lot of other acolytes in the administration that the United States is in what? A post-constitutional period. Russell Vought, the director of the Office of Management and Budget, the guy who was one of the key players in designing the government shutdown, is also the guy that is behind this much bigger idea that the United States is in a post-constitutional period. What in the world does that mean? If the United States is in a post-constitutional period, you don't have a United States, because the Constitution is the founding document of the country. So you've heard me say before, if the Democrats were really, really smart and understood messaging, that they would start constructing an argument that simply asks the question, what's the role of government? And the answer to that question can be very simply found in the preamble of the Constitution. We the people. And it sets forth the purposes of the Constitution, which are to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our prosperity. 52 words, 52 very simple words that simply explain the Constitution's goals and philosophy. Gil Scott-Heron told us, if I control your resources, I control your world. Or in this case, if I know where the money is, Russell Vought, and what dollars go to what programs, I can control the country. Am I connecting these dots? If I control your resources, I control your world. Because Russell Vought is what? The director of the Office of Management and Budget. What are budgets? Budgets are no more than numerical representations of priorities. Look at it on a personal level. If I want to understand what any of you all value on a monthly basis, all I really have to do is look at where you spend your money, how much you get each month, how much you put out each month, and where that put out each month goes. And I will have a fairly clear understanding of what you value. If you write checks for kids' tuition or for the education of your children, I will have an understanding that you value education. If the amount you spend on your car notes is more than what you spend on groceries, rent, and education for your kids, I'll have a pretty good idea. You love cars, and you love cars more than you love to eat, and you love cars more than choosing a better place to live. Not accusations, just budgets are numeric representations of priority. So again, Gil Scott-Heron tells us, if I control your resources, if I control your paycheck, I control your world. If I'm Russell Vogt and I know where the money is because I control the Office of Management and Budget, I know what dollars go to what programs and where, I can control the country. And now he's telling the president, we're in a post-constitutional America. And Donald Trump is writing executive orders impacting or trying to impact the right of people to peaceably assemble and to petition the government. The First Amendment tells us very clearly, Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech or of the press or of the right of the people to peaceably assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. So that takes us to another dot to connect. If I control your access to information, I can greatly impact your ability to challenge the actions of the government. That's why the freedom of speech and of the press are in the First Amendment. If I can control your access to information, I can greatly impact your ability to challenge the actions of the government. But folks, don't just think this is Trumpian. Don't get caught up in the Trump derangement syndrome. In 2022, during the Biden administration, recall what Joe Biden established as the Disinformation Governance Board. The Disinformation Governance Board. It was an advisory board of the United States Department of Homeland Security, established and then shortly thereafter disbanded in 2022. The board's stated function was to protect national security by disseminating guidance to Homeland Security agencies on combating misinformation, malinformation, and disinformation that in their minds threatened the security of the homeland. This was the Biden administration monitoring and controlling, or trying to, what was posted on social media. So before Donald Trump was making his attack on the ideology of Antifa in 2025, in 2022, Joe Biden was trying to implement the Disinformation Governance Board. And so now there are newly released emails that show a coordination between social media companies and the Biden administration on COVID information. Social media giants were deferring Facebook and Twitter and all of that they were deferring to the Biden administration over whether to censor dissenting COVID-19 information. That's where a lot of this started. It started around COVID-19, and then it went into election information and all kinds of other things. Joshua Lee wrote this piece in 22. Top-ranking Biden administration officials appear to have pressured Facebook, Twitter, and other social media platforms to censor content the federal government considered misinformation. And remember, censorship violates the First Amendment. And they and Joshua Lee got this information from federal government emails that were obtained by 2 Republican state attorneys generals. See, because at that time, Republicans saw Joe Biden's attempt to establish this Disinformation Governance Board. Republicans saw the establishment of the board as targeting Republicans' ability to use social media to disseminate information. Republicans thought that the Biden administration was going to attack them, use social media as a way of preventing them from getting their messages out. And so Joe Biden appoints this woman, Nina Jankowicz, 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 easy for you to say, Jankowicz. And who is Nina Jankowicz? She managed programs relating to Russia and Belarus for the National Democratic Institute. And what is the National Democratic Institute? It's basically a think tank, a NGO that help put together disinformation campaigns to help garner collective support for the U.S. funded conflict in Ukraine. So the director of Joe Biden's Disinformation Governance Board was helping to create disinformation in support of United States positions, hoping to garner collective support for these misguided adventures overseas. So here's the point. There's a concerted effort to keep you in the dark, stifle dissent. And it's not simply an effort of the Trump administration, as I just showed you by what they were trying to implement during the Biden administration. It's bipartisan. And again, the Disinformation Governance Board only lasted about 2 months because Republicans in Congress got wind of what was going on. Again, they were afraid that the ire and the targets of the Disinformation Governance Board would turn on them, and they were able to shut the whole thing down. So this disinformation campaign is not simply Trumpian, it's bipartisan. And as I say about so much of the military industrial complex, it's not administration policy. It's American foreign policy. It's bipartisan. Now, let me quickly, as I was, actually, it was a couple weeks ago, I was in class and I was talking to my kids about the First Amendment and the Second Amendment. And when I sat down and put the two of them together, I saw something that I have been saying for a very long time, but when I saw it in front of me, the light came on. You've heard me say before, I'm sure you've heard me say before, that the Second Amendment, that the claimed constitutional right for you to own a firearm is not stated in the Second Amendment. Here's the Second Amendment. A well-regulated militia, comma, being necessary to the security of a free state, comma, the right of the people to keep and bear arms, comma, shall not be infringed, period. You've heard me say before that if you understand punctuation, English grammar, and sentence structure, you would understand very clearly that, and the difference between an independent clause and a dependent clause, that you would see very clearly that the Second Amendment, a well-regulated militia, comma, being necessary to the security of a free state, comma, the right of the people to keep and bear arms, comma, shall not be infringed. Those words between the commas are all dependent clauses. What are they dependent on? A well-regulated militia, the very first statement in the sentence. So if you do away with the militia, you also do away with the right of the people to keep and bear arms. Why? Because the reason for you to keep and bear arms, the well-regulated militia, goes away. And now the well-regulated militia has been replaced by the National Guard. So I'm not saying that you can't own a gun. What I'm saying is it's not a constitutionally guaranteed right. Now, I just mentioned the First Amendment. So we're going to put up this slide. The First Amendment and the Second Amendment, look at them together. And what do you see? Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, comma, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, semicolon. What does that mean? That the establishment clause, establishment of religion, and the free exercise clause, that's one complete thought. That's an independent thought because it's separated by a semicolon. If you take the establishment clause and the free exercise clause out of the First Amendment then reads, Congress shall make no law respecting or abridging the freedom of speech or it still makes sense. If you go to the second clause, abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, semicolon. That's a independent clause. It stands on its own. If you take it out of the First Amendment still makes sense. Or of the right of people to peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. Independent clause. Look at the Second Amendment. A well-regulated militia, comma. Take that out of the sentence, and what do you have? A sentence that doesn't make sense. Take it out, it reads, being necessary to the security of a free state. Well, I guess that could, but you get my point. You take the second sentence or the second statement out of the sentence. It doesn't make sense. It's all tied to you needing a well-regulated militia. So that's a little side note. Now back to our regularly scheduled program. So I just discussed this 20-year deal. And in the opening of the show, I discussed the 20-year deal, the desire of a 20-year deal. And going back to, I think it was Lee Camp, it would double the usual term for U.S. Israel military agreements. The current Memorandum of Understanding, or the current MOU, that was negotiated under the Obama administration was the third 10-year military aid deal between the two countries, Israel and the United States. The current MOU, under which the U.S. provides Israel $3.8 billion in military aid each year, this expires in the year 2028. And Axios reports that Israel officials hope to have a replacement deal in place over the next year. Now, I could get into the United States providing this type of military aid violates American law because the Israeli government, it has been and continues to be involved in genocide of the Palestinians. The United States is prohibited by the U.S. Arms Export Control Act. The United States is prohibited from providing weapons to countries that engage in genocide. So our providing this $3.8 billion per year of your hard-earned tax money is not only immoral, it's illegal. But since October 7th of 2023, the U.S. has provided significantly more aid to Israel to support the genocidal campaign in Gaza. I think this is Lee Camp, and other Israeli military operations in the region. According to Brown University's Cost of War project, in the last 2 years, or in the 2 years following the October 7th attack, the U.S. government has spent at least $21.7 billion on military aid to Israel, and another $9.65 billion to $12.07 billion on wars in Yemen, Iran, and other military operations in the region in support of the Zionist settler colonial state called Israel. So we don't have money for WIC. We don't have money for SNAP. We don't have money to help you offset your quickly rising medical premiums. We don't have money for our public education. We don't have money for that. But we've got $21.7 billion over the last 2 years, and another 9.65 to 12.7 for wars in Yemen, Iran, and other military operations. Budgets are numeric representations of priority. Now, I'm not giving you a value judgment. I'm just giving you the data. And I'm hopefully explaining or presenting very clearly that if this is a representative democracy, and if you don't like where your money is being spent, then it's up to you as part of the collective known as we the people to change it. If you're down with genocide, you're down with genocide. If you want your hard-earned tax dollars, if you think that supporting genocide makes more sense and provides more security for the country than educating our children, well then go ahead on. Spend your money where you want where your issues and your priorities are. If you think backing a Zionist settler colonial state makes more sense than affordable health care, as the American population is aging, then go ahead on. If you think that spending up to $12.7 billion over the last 2 years on wars in Yemen, Iran, and other military operations, if you think that makes more sense than guaranteeing you a basic income or guaranteeing you a guaranteed retirement plan, then go ahead on. Die early, die broke, die sick, die hungry. Go ahead on. Nordic and Baltic states pledge $500 million to purchase U.S. weapons for Ukraine. I throw this into the conversation because this now, along with what I just articulated, begs the question, is all of this really a money laundering scheme for militarism? And I think I've made the point or supported the case that the answer to that question is yes. This again, Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. NATO countries have pledged over $3 billion under the new initiative known as PURL, P-U-R-L. A group of 8 Baltic and Nordic NATO states announced last Thursday that they're pooling together funds to pledge $500 million to the NATO scheme that funds U.S. arms shipments to Ukraine, known as the Prioritized Ukraine Requirements List, or PURL, P-U-R-L. According to numbers released by Ukraine earlier this month, the new package funded by Denmark, Estonia, Finland, Iceland, Latvia, Lithuania, Norway, and Sweden brings the total of PURL funds pledged by NATO countries to about $3.3 billion. The initiative first began over the summer following a White House meeting between Trump and NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte. Folks, and I'm going to wrap this up. We're getting out. This is not really about protecting democracy. What you're seeing going on in Ukraine has absolutely nothing to do with protecting democracy. It has absolutely nothing to do with defending Europe against the aggressive machinations of a crazed maniac named Vladimir Putin. Why? Because President Putin has never once said he's trying to expand Russia to take over Europe. Where's the evidence? Just like Donald Trump blowing up boats in the Caribbean, saying that they're drug boats. Where is the evidence? There is none presented. Why? Because it doesn't exist. If this was truly about protecting democracy, why did the United States overthrow the democratically elected president in Ukraine, Viktor Yanukovych, in 2014 in what is known as the Euromaidan Revolution? So the United States overthrows the democratically elected president in a country so that it can then send in the military to protect democracy. Doesn't make sense. And you don't have to have a PhD in political science or a PhD in philosophy. Don't have to have a PhD in anything to say the story doesn't make sense. Why did the U.S. try to install Juan Guaido as the president of Venezuela and replace the democratically elected president Nicolas Maduro? Why is the U.S. trying to militarily and through a sanctions regime overthrow Maduro now? Whether you like Maduro or hate Maduro, I don't know him from Buddha House Cat. And I know Buddha House Cat. I don't know Nicholas Maduro. Never met the man. But I do know that he was a democratically elected president. I do know that Viktor Yanukovych was democratically elected in Ukraine. It's not about democracy. It's about the sale of weapons. It's about American imperialism. It's about neo-colonialism. It's about neoliberalism, the privatization of public action and resources, so that those American and billionaires and other elite around the world can take more of your tax dollars and put it in their pockets. I'm trying to tie all this together, trying to connect these dots. And here's what I think is another data point to support the whole argument, tie it all together so I can tell you all good day. In his 1961 farewell address to the United States, President Dwight D. Eisenhower warned of what? The military-industrial complex. He's the one that coined the term. In 1961, an American former general and retiring president, Dwight Eisenhower, is the one that coined the term military-industrial complex. And Ray McGovern now calls it the Mickey Mat because he's included the media and other elements. So Ray has coined the term the Mickey Mat, but that was based on Eisenhower's coining of the phrase the military-industrial complex. And what is it? A powerful alliance between the military and defense industries and private sector industry. Eisenhower in 1961 talked about the confluence of interests between the military and private sector manufacturing and the defense, what we now know as the defense industries. Because quickly, just a quick step back. Remember, during World War II, we didn't have this robust defense industry. So a lot of private sector companies had to shift production away from consumer commercial product to military product. So they went from making Ford F-150 trucks, if they were in existence at the time, maybe they weren't the F-150, but you get my point, to making Jeeps. They went from, that's where the Jeep came from. The Jeep was created as a military vehicle that then found its way after the war to the private sector market. They went from making Chevy trucks, the Apache truck, to tanks. Boeing went from making commercial airliners for American or TWA, remember Trans World Airways? Now I'm really showing my age. To making B-52s. And after the war, they came to realize there's a hell of a lot of money here. What did Gil Scott-Heron say? Ask them what they're fighting for, and they'll never tell you the economics of war. So Eisenhower cautioned that this this confluence of interests could gain undue influence, and its potential for, quote, misplaced power, end quote, could threaten liberties and democratic processes. Eisenhower's warning emphasized the need for quote, an alert and knowledgeable citizenry. That's why they want to do away with access to information. That's why Donald Trump is so scared of Antifa. That's why Joe Biden wanted the disinformation. What was that thing called? The Disinformation Governance Board. It wasn't really so much to protect you from the evil machinations of Russia and China and Iran. No, they wanted to be sure that conversations like these can't take place, because an alert and knowledgeable citizenry that is given information by a free press will go to Washington and petition the government for redress of grievances. So an alert and knowledgeable citizenry ensures that national security does not compromise democratic values and that resources are balanced between defense and other social needs. Think about that. Think about that. And after you've thought about it, act on it. Don't just think about it, be about it. Thank you all for joining me today. Thank you all for listening attentively, I hope. And new show tomorrow. Dr. Gerald Horn is going to join us tomorrow. As the Moon Man says, that's going to be a big one. Please follow, subscribe, leave a review, share the show. Truly, truly are in need of your support. And remember that this is where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge. That talk without analysis is just chatter. And we don't chatter here on Connecting the Dots. See y'all tomorrow with Dr. Gerald Horn. Until then, I'm Dr. Wilmer Leon. Have a blessed remainder of your day. Peace. I'm out.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.